Welcome to the Oshow. I'm Laura Babcock, and this is the Scandal Panel. And before we get into all the new scandals happening with the Ford government since we last spoke, I just want to take a moment here because our Scandal Panel is made up of former journalists. And we all learned that Bell has now laid off 4,800 employees across Canada, shut down dozens of radio stations, and it's devastating. It's devastating not only to so many of our colleagues, it's devastating to the people of Canada who, as Keith Leslie, who joins us here on the Scandal Panel, told us, there are no more news shows at noon in all of the Maritimes because of this devastating news. So while the company makes profits, big time profits, we have 4,800 Canadians who have just found out that they've lost their jobs. So our thoughts go out to all of you, and to our audience here on the Oshow. Just makes me want to double down on our commitment to hold leaders to account and to keep providing this show to talk about what's happening in our province and in our country, because we need to. Less journalism we have, the worse things are going to get. And we here at the Oshow are certainly committed to keeping you informed and keeping a critical eye on all of it. But before we get into the Ford latest scandals, I just want to go to both Keith Leslie and Mark Cripps, both former journalists, as I mentioned, and just get your feedback on the news, anything that you'd like to add.
Well, as you mentioned, it's not just the 4,800 people and their families that are immediately devastated by this. It's the cancellation of a bunch of local news programs, local, in particular TV and radio. The TV newscast, as you mentioned, I noted online that there's no new newscast in Atlantic Canada. And I tuned in today to see what was happening to my friends and neighbors in Cape Breton, which is only 50 kilometers from where I live. They had 150 centimeters of snow. We had 90 centimeters, and I can't believe what they're doing. No local newscast today. We had an episode of Seinfeld. Thank you very much. It's the local news that's disappearing here. When I started at CKOC, the top 40 CKOC in the 1970s, there was 7 of us in that newsroom. And at CHML, which was the news talk station, they had 30 people in that newsroom. TV stations were loaded. There were journalism jobs everywhere because local news was a condition of license. What happened to the CRTC? Of course, you know, it's just swamped under in the digital world like so many other groups. But for goodness sakes, condition of license is a pretty simple thing to maintain to keep local news. And even before CTV did this, and Bell Media canceled these newscasts, they took the local news at 5 o'clock, which was an hour long, and cut it to half hour so that they could put the Sandy Ronaldo national newscast in at 5:30, promote that better. Again, more national news isn't what's needed. We don't need to see more images from Gaza. We don't need to see more Donald Trump. We need to see more local news. And this is what's lost in all this.
I think we need to see Gaza and Donald Trump, but I agree with you that we absolutely need the local reporting as well. And it's not just the local, though, that was shut down. I found out today that CTV The Debate, a show that I do regularly, has been canceled. I feel for the team there. W5, Mark? W5, one of the longest shows in Canadian and television history, an investigative show, is now gone. So, Mark, your thoughts on this?
Well, my first thought is to anybody who's out there celebrating this right now, fuck you. Like, fuck you. Honestly, if your life is that pathetic that you are celebrating 4,800 people across this country who have families, and you think that's cool, you're going to get exactly what you deserve coming down the road with all the propaganda that's now going to thrive in this world where we don't have journalism to give us local news. I worked on my whole career in local news. I think it's so much part of the fabric of this country. And over the last 10 years, we've seen it erode and erode and erode. And we see people celebrating the erosion of that who have no context and no relationship to the news that these people are bringing to their communities. This is mom and pop stuff. This is local charities. This is things that make our communities thrive. If you think that's cool, you're an idiot. Okay, if you think people losing their jobs that do that kind of work is cool, and it's more mainstream media bites the dust, yay! You got some real mental problems. So I am, I'm not surprised. We have an oligarchy of news organizations in this country owned by American hedge funds and large, corporations that are, only care about shareholder value. And, I fear for the future for my child, and the how is she going to find out? How is she going to get the local news, the news that matters to her? Because the world happens around us more than it does in the big sphere. We are impacted by the things that are going on around us. This is the nuts and bolts of life. And it's just a travesty.
So it's a very difficult time for so many in the media across this country, and I think for our democracy. And to add salt to the wound, here in Ontario, we just found out, like every time we do a scandal panel, there's a new scandal that morning. It's crazy. We just found out that the Ford government is spending millions, maybe tens of millions of dollars on It's Happening Here propaganda campaign. Yeah, it is happening here. It's happening here. Here in Ford's Ontario, we have hospitals who cannot keep their emergency rooms open across the province. We have seniors who died in long-term care homes that might not have had to if the Ford government had cared. We have small business owners being put out of work by the Ford government so that they can give Service Ontario locations to their rich donor pal who runs Staples Canada. We have the Ford government degrading our environment. Yes, might be going back into that Greenbelt, breaking another promise, and spending, let's not forget, $500 million with a B dollars on a parking garage for a 95-year secret spa on the waterfront in Toronto that nobody wants to use, and we all think it's probably just a smokescreen for a casino. So yeah, it's happening here. It's happening here in Ontario. Devastation of our healthcare system, devastation of our education system, devastation of our environment, devastation of our small businesses, a massive homeless crisis where in every downtown in this province, we have people sleeping on the street on concrete, while this government does what? Uses our money for a propaganda campaign. It's happening here. Throws a big party last weekend where they posted these idiotic videos of them dancing. One of the posts even said, all the haters on social media are so mean, but you know what? We work hard, so we play hard. I'm like watching that going, you're a freaking adult making over 150 grand a year, and you got people sleeping on the street all over the place. It's happening here, Ontario, and it ain't good. Keith, to you, sir, on the scandals since we last spoke.
Oh, gosh, I don't know where to start. Let's start with last weekend's PC convention then in Niagara Falls, where, of course, the media were banned. Don't want you coming in here asking the types of questions, raising those types of issues like you just talked about, Laura. Homeless people and concerns like that, the privatization of our healthcare, the emergency departments being backed up so far that they're treating people in the ambulance bay, not just the hallways now. All of it is just, but no, we're going to have a private convention with your political dollars that you've donated. It's insane. Why wouldn't you invite the media? Now, there's always plenary sessions and budgetary things that are closed to the media at these things, but normally the media go and camp out for 3 days and spend the whole weekend at these conventions. Yeah. And even report on things like who gets elected to their board. It's important to know just who's running the show and what they're talking about behind closed doors. Yes, it can be embarrassing for the parties. All the parties debate resolutions that, my God, no one hopes they don't ever want to see passed, but they have to debate them. They can be embarrassing. But to hide your government away, especially when you're a government that was elected without participating in election debates. There's a by-election right now. The guy won't participate in a debate. The PC candidate, he's a former radio host. Can't debate, participate. Come on. This is just, it's so anti-democratic, along with so many of the things they're doing. Same with, these sole source contracts. And Doug Ford taking on Richard Southern, who, is saying, you're a dog like a bone. Yes, he is, because there's so many unanswered questions, such as, why was this a sole source contract? Where's the real business case? Not these numbers you floated out here. Saving $1 million over 3 years, we're told now, to put a bunch of, formerly it seems, PC supporters, longtime PC supporters, out of business. One woman had been in business 23 years, another 17, had, 4 employees. and they're told, well, you're out of business at the end of January. Were they ever asked if they could expand their hours to, match up the Staples hours?
They're giving millions of our tax dollars to American companies. It's owned,
Yes.
Staples Canada is owned by a private equity firm in New York City. And so not only are they not going to recoup any savings for us by this move, but they're actually spending out of pocket our cash to put it into Staples stores. And there's a memo that was found that says that the employees are to leverage the foot traffic to sell Staples stuff. I mean, what the hell is happening? And you credited Richard Southam, and this is why we're so passionate about journalism here on the Oshow, as all former journalists, is that what he did when he was talking to one of Ford's ministers, and he said, you're not answering my question. You're not answering my question. And the minister was foolish enough to think that he could just spout these stupid talking points about the Staples deal that had no validity to them. And then we saw 3 bodyguards have to come and try to block Richard Southam from talking to this cabinet minister. It was ridiculous. It was one of the biggest media fails I've ever seen in terms of a performance by a politician. And
they should have tackled. They should have tackled him even earlier. This guy, he's the one that's, in defending this, he said, why they put these long-term people out of business. He said, well, no one gets contracts in perpetuity. No, but the Austrian Spa can get a 95 year
except for the
lease.
Spa 95-year secret deal. That one seems to last.
That's pretty much
forever.
in perpetuity as far as I can see, as far as business cases go, all of it. That cabinet minister's performance was so pathetic. As you say, to see 3, and they weren't just, last question, Minister, we got to touch. We will see grab an elbow, grab a shoulder. Oh no, they physically had to get between him and the camera, and the minister's trying to lean over in between to get to Richard's microphone, just trying to defend himself.
Richard, he went around the giant thug.
Absolutely.
And tried to keep going. And so then, of course, at the next press conference, what does the premier do? Basically,
turned on Richard.
Yeah, throws the cabinet minister under the bus saying, well, apparently it's not being dealt with or whatever he does. And then he goes to Richard. He goes, you got to move on, buddy. You got to find something else, which to those of us who are in the media means you're really, really worried about this topic. And we should.
And it wasn't our idea. It wasn't the bureaucrats. It was the guys the civil servants in the background come up with this idea. It's like the chief of staff at the housing with the Greenbelt stuff. Apparently it was all done. Oh, yeah. Came to cabinet. We went, oh, hell yeah. And away it went. Oh, damn.
Yeah, and you know what? It's getting closer and closer, email after email, guys, since we last spoke. I'll go to you on this, Mark, because I know how passionate you are about the environment. Bit by bit, right? We're finding out that pretty much the Premier's office knew a long time ago about this whole deal, and we're still waiting on that RCMP investigation update on the Greenbelt. But I saw a new headline just today, Mark, that Ford may in fact not be giving back all of the Greenbelt lands that he promised when he did his big mea culpa, please trust me again, Ontario parking lot charade this September. So what's going on with that? And I mean, are they just figuring they might as well go for broke? Or what is happening on the Greenbelt scandal?
Well, the word on the word that I've read is that they're preparing an omnibus bill that will basically, and if anybody understands what an omnibus bill, it's designed to have a poison pill in it, right? You put a bill together that has a lot of good nuggets in it, and then you put one in there that if you vote this down, you're voting all of this good stuff down. So, what I'm hearing is that they're preparing an omnibus bill that will give them additional powers to basically circumvent expropriation of lands and allow the only recourse be through the courts, which will cut through a lot of the time that it takes when expropriation processes happen, including environmental assessments. So the thinking is that this could eventually then come back, force expropriation of lands in these former designated areas that were under the official plans that the Ford government imposed on municipalities, and say, hey, all our donors, guess what? We got all your lands back. Giddy up and let's build those houses. Now, what's interesting is that I also read that some people are tying this new advertising campaign that you mentioned earlier.
It's happening here,
right, to this whole conditioning of the Ontario public to think infrastructure is so good and we need infrastructure. Oh my God, we could be, it's all happening here. Infrastructure, and 413, and guess who's going to get really rich from the 413? Oh my God, we can't wait to make those people happy because they're so mad at us right now. They are so mad at us because we took all those lands out of the Greenbelt. Because we had to back away from that. But don't worry, we got that other big prize for you and we are going to make sure we don't make the same mistakes. This time we're going to cut through all the crap and we're just going to go straight to expropriation. We're going to just get this done because this government is focused, as I've said before, on legacy projects that aren't about social welfare or the betterment of people who are hurting. It's about looking back, 10 years from now and saying, we built that road.
It's about
that nobody's
getting rich.
using.
I mean, and it's about getting rich. Like their legacy for the people of Ontario is going to be monstrous, right? So I don't give a fuck about what buildings they build or what they put their names on. Enough people in Ontario know what's going on. As Lincoln said, you can fool some of the people some of the time, you can fool some of the people all of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. If I misquoted Lincoln, I apologize. The point is that people everywhere I go now, they're pissed at Ford for something, whether it is what he was trying to do with the Greenbelt because they're farmers, or whether it is anyone who's been to a hospital in the last 6 months, or whether it's anyone who's been downtown and sees, I saw right after we did the big food line at Gore Park, over 1,000 people, I think, last Saturday. My daughter and I were driving through the most vaulted, beautiful intersection in Hamilton where the big banks are and the gorgeous Piggott building, back from the heyday when the city was, the hottest place in the country. And there were 3 people laying in a pile of sleeping bags in the doorway of one of those buildings and a young man on his heels shooting up in his arm. I've walked that block 1,000 times. It's right across from the Hamilton Club that I was a member of for years. It has never, ever been this bad. And we just found out that the town of Belleville, I believe, is calling for a state of emergency because they had like double-digit overdose deaths.
37.
Yeah, 24 was the last I heard update. It's like they had 7 more today or something.
Yeah, 37.
So guys, just for our audience, if they're not as obsessed with this shit as we are, the same day that in my Twitter feed, I am seeing that the town of Belleville, a beautiful town, is calling a state of emergency because of overdoses. I see, I'm not even going to call her the Minister of Health because I don't think that she's interested in health. The Minister of Privatizing Health, let's just give her a proper name here. She's on Twitter with a photo of her getting an award for privatization of the healthcare system, while people in one of the towns near Toronto are going into emergency because of overdoses. If you don't see the connection between them underfunding healthcare in the public system, underfunding mental health supports, and constantly spending all of our money promoting gambling and promoting booze in corner stores and all the other bullshit that this government is prioritizing, it's a war on the poor. There's no other way to look at it. And it's sickening. And honestly, every week, I hope that the same people I saw on that food line make it. Because for some of them, I honestly don't know how they can. It haunts me. It haunts me how they make it through the night every night. And so this premier, I don't care. I mean, I care how much of their money that we're spending, but they can buy ads in the Grammys all they want, saying it's happening here. Yeah, it's happening here. Our once great province of Ontario is being devastated by malfeasance and corruption and profiteering after the pandemic. And it is hurting the people of Ontario. And I am so sick of it. So yeah, it's happening here, Doug. We'll tell the world what's happening here. And maybe next time, spend our tax dollars on our hospitals and our homeless population and not on these fucking Grammy ads. Sorry, go ahead.
What's going to happen? We had every ambulance in Belleville in the downtown this week, virtually every day, dealing with overdoses. What's going to happen, as you say, the homeless, the people with nowhere to go, some people are addicted, shooting up on the streets. What's going to happen in our downtown? What used to be the big difference between Canadian cities and American cities? Mm-hmm. Our downtowns were not hollowed out. They were vibrant places. If this continues for very long, or very much longer, people will flee the downtown. They will not come back downtown for any reason. All of a sudden we will end up, and then what we'll end up with, an even worse situation, fewer services, even though they'll be needed in a concentrated area. It's going to hurt everyone. Once you destroy your downtown like that, look at Buffalo. We've all been to Buffalo. Yeah. There's 3 blocks left in that downtown that you feel safe to walk in. And it's been that way for decades.
It's so sad because I'm not originally from Hamilton, but I've been here for the last 28 years or something. Mark would know this, Keith, that our downtown was hollowed out. It was a Rust Belt city. There was a massive effort for the last 10 years to revitalize and rejuvenate our downtown. We were starting to see it come around with the new restaurant row and all of our arts and everything. And honestly, I feel more unsafe walking through downtown Hamilton now than I ever have. And I'll tell you, it's not because the people in the line are the problem. It's because the desperation in this province, in Ontario, and honestly, the lack of effort by Mayor Andrea Horwath to do a damn thing about it has made it the worst it's ever been. And it's heartbreaking, but I'll tell you this, the homeless people that I speak with in the line, when we comment on how much bigger the line is every single time, they say to me, it's going to get so much worse. Like, it's going to get so much worse. They know that from how they see it on the corners. Like, they are right there, and they're telling me that this is going to get exponentially worse. So, I mean, we're talking about these things not just because, you know, we might be compassionate people. You can't have economic development. I don't give a shit how many houses in fancy land that Ford is building or how much he says he's putting into infrastructure. You can't have economic development when people are afraid to live in places or to visit those businesses and those restaurants. Like, it's cognitive dissonance watching this government go on and on about how great Ontario is doing when anyone who lives here sees with their own eyes that no, in fact, it's not. You're running it into the ground for profiteering of your pandemic pals, right? And this is historic. People do this in pandemics. We're watching people take advantage, paying private nursing agencies 3 times what nurses were willing to work for in the public system. I mean, it's not accidental, it's deliberate. We are watching the privatization of our province. It's being sold off for goods to pals and donors of Ford's party. So, Mark, yes, they might be building some legacy monuments to their egos, but I'm far more concerned about the fact that they are just trying to grab the bag of cash while people are the most vulnerable in this pandemic.
Well, you know, to pivot a little bit to the mandate letters, because I think that's another scandal that, you know, that the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the government. But, you know, it couldn't, you know, someone who worked in government where we were quite proud to put our mandate letters out, because to us, it was the report card to the people. Here's what we think we're going to accomplish, and you can hold us to account whether we do that or not. There's obviously things within the Ford government's mandate letters that they do not want to share with the public. And it sort of follows in this theme of like secret deals, secret mandate letters, secret phones. You know, everything, the way that this government operates is in a veil of secrecy. And it's ironic because we have a premier who has been quoted as saying, we're the most transparent government ever. And it's so counter to everything that we're seeing. And I don't know how they, you know, so obviously governments operate in secret. There's no, like, it's like, obviously they do. Yeah. Some operate more secretively than others. And I think that's what we're seeing here.
But you know what's driving me nuts, so guys, and I just want to call it out because, you know, we started the Oshow as a local Hamilton show, and then it had to become a provincial show because of the Greenbelt. It was just such a massive scandal, which will continue to grow. But now we're seeing a lot of the same things happening at the federal level. So I may have to move into federal politics with this program because it's all the same thing, right? The mainstream media has a lot of flaws, but it also had a lot of resources and a lot of, you know, I had to put my stories through a lawyer and everything else. Now that idea of a shared bunch of facts is out the window. Everyone's going to go down their little algorithm rabbit holes to find the news that fits their own bias, right? We know that. It started in the US, it's happening here. So we're not going to have a shared set of facts to work with. We're already familiar with that after the trucking convoy and all the vaccination nonsense. We've seen false information and misinformation and malinformation propagate across this country. And it is very worrying. So what is particularly pernicious to me and what I'm particularly pissed off about on this Oshow, and I did warn our audience that I'm in a foul fucking mood, is that it's propaganda of the kind that seeks to gaslight, that seeks to make you question your reality. You know, it's one thing to tout a policy that's been successful. It's another thing entirely to do something like It's Happening Here campaign, which is completely disengaged from the reality of most people in Ontario. And people may say, oh, well, you know, he's still leading in the polls. Yes, because he's spending a shit ton of our money on propaganda, and propaganda works, or they would have never used it. And so when I see that and another big campaign of bullshit going out there, and you say, I'm for economic development, guys. I used to run a chamber of commerce. I would love to see industry and business and jobs in this province more than anything. But it can't be at the expense of the mental health of the literally dying of preventable death in the streets and in the hospitals and in the ambulance bays of this province. Like it's not okay to gaslight the public the way that the Ford government is. And we have to call it out early and often. And, you know, as you mentioned, Mark, scandals with the mandate letters, scandals with the healthcare, scandals with Staples, scandals with Ontario Place, scandals now, you know, we're even finding out about scandals with the money that they're spending on their own propaganda. And it goes on and on and on. So Keith, a wise one, since you've been covering Queen's Park and you obviously have better anger management than I do. When you look forward, given just all the crap that's come up in the last 2 weeks, and I feel like we're missing something, guys, based on the size of my Twitter feed, my reactions on Twitter, I feel like there's more scandals that we've been enduring. When you look at all of this, like, where do you think, do you think there is a pinch point for this government where either the RCMP investigation or guys like Richard Southam and Colin DeMello and everybody who's out there swinging hard now, or the media scrum? I mean, do you think that there is a possibility to bring them to their knees, to be accountable to the people of Ontario and save the lives of the people in jeopardy? Or is it going to take Bonnie Crombie or the Liberals to put a new value proposition out there for the voter to move to? I mean, what in your experience do you think we have ahead of us?
I don't think Bonnie Crombie and the Liberals need to wait. I think they need to act right now and come up with their own version of it's happening here. And as you say, we've got some different images we can present to you. We can present that food line image. We can present the people sleeping in the under bridges, shooting up in the streets, sleeping in tents, hospital emergency departments just jammed, people outside in ambulance bays, ambulance crews waiting entire shifts, all these things that we know. That can be depicted in that same it's happening here. Just a little footnote. That ad would never have been approved under the old rules that existed before because it's far too partisan, far too congratulatory for a government, and they're not selling any policy at all. Kathleen Wynne's Liberals changed that. And now Doug Ford's government certainly took advantage of it and probably would have changed the rules themselves, but it wasn't them that did it. They just took full advantage of it. And they are taking something like a $13 million campaign to tell us that it's...
They're guessing based on the last one they did last year. By my count, they're up to 37 million on this shift. And I'm glad you brought that up because I'm not partisan here. If Kathleen Wynne's government did the gas plant scandal, $1 billion boondoggle, and they changed these rules, it's on them and on you, Mark. Having worked for them, I'm just kidding. But I mean, but go ahead, Mark.
Well, on that, like, advertising went through a lot of scrutiny with the Auditor General, and I think rightly so. And I think, yes, all governments push the line on what, and I remember, when this all bubbled to the surface, like, we were literally getting to the point, Keith might remember this, that the Auditor General had an issue with the apple being red, and that was overly partisan to do a Foodland Ontario ad when the apple was red. Because, so, I mean, there is some limits to, like, I can see where governments might, but I think I think Keith nailed it. Like, I think the government is really pushing the message and a narrative that can be completely turned on them. And I applaud Keith for that advice, because whether it's the NDP or the Liberals, somebody should be out right now saying, here's the truth. Government needs to advertise. I mean, it is what it is, but it should not be self-congratulatory. And this one stretches the limits of what taxpayers' dollars should be used for.
And I know Bonnie's people watch the Oshow because I've talked to them. And I know that Merritt watches the Oshow. If you remember the whole Greenbelt thing back in the summer, our suggestion around wearing that green belt, they watch it, they pay attention to it. So let me just build on your idea, your brilliant idea, Keith, because I am a geek for doing PR ad campaigns. There was one in the US, the Lincoln Project, which is a pro-democracy retaliation to, repudiation of Trump campaign, bunch of brilliant strategists. And you remember the Reagan ad, It's Morning in America, with all those, beautiful, inspiring images back in the 80s that helped win him the election? Well, they did It's Morning in America with a U in there, and they showed all the dystopian things that were happening under Trump, and it was highly successful. So what you're saying right here is it's happening here. Yeah, do that. Just put a comma, all right, it is, or whatever, own it, it's happening here, all right, and show those other images, right? And any of us could pick them up. I have enough on my phone just from what I've seen in the last month that I could put together that entire 30-second spot or 8-second spot for TikTok or whatever. So I agree with you. Get in the fight now. Merritt's in the fight. Keep fighting. Bonnie, she got in the fight. She sent out a letter so far, but let's see that ramp up. I just want to end on a couple of good notes before we all feel like all is lost. It's not. They are neither inevitable nor invincible, right? Let's remember that. And there was a ruling that said that the long-term care class action lawsuit against the Minister of Long-Term Care during COVID and this Ford government can go forward, right? That's a major ruling. And there's always a way in a democracy, as long as we can keep it, where we can peacefully go after governments with huge rallies, with lawsuits like this. And there's still the RCMP investigation going on, and calls, I think it was Bonnie who called for an audit or a value for money on the Staples scandal deal. So we are seeing the opposition use all the tools in their tool belt. And I think we as the public have to continually call out the bullshit and call out the propaganda and give credit to people like Richard for not being afraid of the ministers or of Ford. And that's what it's going to take. So last thoughts to both of you before we end this very cathartic episode of the Scandal Panel, guys. Thank you. I was losing my mind. So Keith, and then to Mark.
This long-term care home class action suit, is huge. This government passed legislation to specifically protect the owners of these homes and the operators from lawsuits, even though we had thousands of preventable deaths during COVID, the initial phases of COVID, when this government, in their own report, found this, basically ignored the long-term care home issue, even though it was running rampant through these homes. And these were the most vulnerable Ontarians or Canadians that to face this plague or pandemic. Yeah. This government literally did nothing, barely talked about them for months until they finally turned their head around to it. And by then there was something like 3,200 deaths in long-term care homes in Ontario. This class action suit, the judge did caution, it's going to be a heck of an uphill battle for the Ministry of Health to have a different standard over the Ministry of Long-Term Care for these homes. But he said he couldn't rule it out, that it should be something that should be fought in court. So this is going to be very, very interesting. But more than anything, it's going to bring out and emphasize again for everyone how much more poorly the privately run and owned long-term care homes performed. They had worse outbreaks and far worse morbidity than the privately run and municipally run long-term care homes. And the more we can emphasize that, the more Ontarians are going to balk at having even more of their healthcare services privatized, because this outcome is not a surprise. And it's so well documented. Every private long-term care home had a worse outcome than the municipally or publicly run ones.
And I got to say, my cousin, who was like a little brother to me, Innis Ingram, chained himself to a tree outside of his mom's long-term care home and went on a hunger strike to try to get that investigation going. So we lost him.
Yeah.
But he fought, hard for his mom's. I say that, guys, because, these are people who have died and didn't need to die in Ontario. And there are people in the hallways who are dying who don't need to. And in the ambulance bays and on the street, somebody died in a fire trying to heat themselves before Christmas, just outside of a shelter. They were living in a tent. So, for all of our rage and all of our frustration.
There's so much pain. There is so much pain in this world right now, especially, and I'm not blaming it on Ford government or anybody. I'm blaming it on all governments.
Yep.
But, I would suggest, and I mean, I don't understand why, if the Ontario government looks around and they see what we see and they see what their voters see every day, and they can't be thinking that people are running around going, they got what they deserve. Like, I feel like there's an opportunity here for the Ford government to show another side of a progressive conservative side, a social conservative, like a social side of a conservative, that the traditional conservative that cared about things, the things that the Conservative Party for 47 years in this province built so many of the great social institutions that we have. 47 straight years in power under Bill Davis, Bill Davis being the last greatest one of that genre. And like I feel like there's an opportunity for them politically. And this is why I don't understand. They're still leading in the polls. Why wouldn't you make an all-out effort to say, look, nobody needs to see this. It's not good for our society. It's not good for our downtowns. It's not good for us in general. We need to refocus. They can come up with a throne speech. They can reset the government, and they can put resources and focus into providing services to fix this problem. It doesn't have to be blame Justin Trudeau or blame anybody else, right? These are provincial issues. These are things that are happening in our communities. And I beg the Ford government, anybody in that government that has a heart, to lobby, to not let this go on, because it will not get better. And you cannot, your legacy will be you are going to leave this to somebody else to fix. That's the legacy you want, that you turned a blind eye, you ignored it, and you said, I'm going to make it somebody else's problem. And then you know what happens? Then when they're in opposition, they bitch and complain, and they accuse the ruling government of not doing enough to help all these people that are suffering. It's so, I don't get it. Please, I beg you, please. We need help. People need help. Please.
We put out a clip from our last scandal panel, guys, where I was calling out the MPPs for the damage that they're causing to the people around them. And it got easily over 10,000 views within hours, because, it resonates what you're saying. I don't like ending shows crying about the state of things, but I can't help it. Families are losing people. Belleville is in a state of emergency over overdoses. I mean, if they can't see the pain and they put us through these expensive ad campaigns, you know what that $13 million for this It's Happening Here campaign could have done for just the homeless people who are living on the streets in Hamilton, the 1,600? That would be life-changing, to do a housing first and put them into transitional shelter and then deal with all their complex needs. That has an 88% success rate when you do that. The solutions are here. Instead, they are privatizing and chopping up our province and making the future harder for people. And you're right, Mark, they might do it and then leave the mess behind for the next government, who's hopefully not them. But I'll say this, that's 3 years away.
Yeah.
How many people died in Belleville this weekend, guys, from an overdose?
I don't think they had any deaths. They were all just hospitalized overdose.
Thank God.
Belleville held by a Conservative MPP, by the way, and a minister, right?
Yep. Todd Smith.
You know what? Mental health and drug use treatment and all the rest of it falls under the purview of the province. So, if one more person says blame Trudeau, I blame him a lot for a lot of things, like an insufficient support system for immigration and all the rest of it. But it's 5 years of majority the Ford government has had here, guys. 5 years of a majority means total power. And what have they done? Right? Got an RCMP investigation, got a class action lawsuit for possibly preventable deaths under their watch of our elders. They've done some bad things. And, it's happening here, Ontario, and it ain't good. And it's Ford's fault. So I'm going to leave it there with you guys. Thank you so much for doing the scandal panel. We'll have you back every time I think I'll maybe give you guys a break and let you dig out of your snow. We find out that there's more chaos and potential corruption going on in this province. So thank you all for watching the Oshow, and we will keep it going. I think now more than ever, we all have to keep calling this stuff out, especially as so many media are losing their jobs in the mainstream media. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Keith. And I hope your days go well. Take care.
When you care about current affairs, it's on the Oshow. And when you want to get clear what's going on here, it's on the Oshow. If you like to stay in the know, tune yourself into the Oshow. It's the Oshow. Laura Babcock's the Oshow. With a lot of great guests, she puts them to the test on the Oshow. there's no doubt they'll be calling them out on the Oshow. Stand for something or fall for it all. Ontario, hear the call of the Oshow. It's a podcast, the Oshow. Laura Babcock's the Oshow. Stay informed with the Oshow.